Hello, everyone. My name is Devon Robertson, and I am the MB1 here at the GSB. Um, Thank you for attending the BSA conference first and foremost. I know it's been a tough week, and we want to thank you for making time to be here today. This is the Run This Town panel, where we'll be diving deep into the intersectionalities of the public and private sector. We have a couple great speakers here with you today. Unfortunately, Mayor Quinn Lucas, he could not make it due to a personal reason, but we have some great speakers, and Mayor Weston Broom from Baton Rouge, and Aaron Thomas, who is the president and CEO of Accelerator for America. A little bit more about Mayor Sharon Weston Broom. She's the first female mayor of Baton Rouge and East Baton Rouge Parish. She previously served as Louisiana State Representative and part of the Senate. She was the first woman to hold the speaker positions of pro tempore and president pro tempore in both the Senate and the representative of Louisiana. She is part of the inaugural class of the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative, and she holds a bachelor from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and a master's of communications from Regent University. Aaron Thomas is the CEO and president of Accelerator for America. He previously served as the director of economic development, and he's actually been a mentor in my life, and I'm honored to call him a friend. He is also a graduate of the GSB, BBSA alumni, graduated in 2017, and also graduated from Harvard University and played Harvard football there, where I also am thankful to be a part of that brotherhood. So I'd like to welcome both to the stage with me.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you, Devon.
Thank you.
Great to be with you.
Great to see you too, Aaron. Great to see you. I wanted to ask a kind of a background question first. I know the GSB is all about trying to find your mission and your impact. I'm curious, from early on in life, did you see yourself in the position you are now, whether it be the mayor or the CEO of a great organization that creates so much impact? Mayor Weston, I'd love for you to go first.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for including me in this meaningful conversation. I always like to share that when I look back on my path, and I certainly know I'm the elder in this conversation today. So I will tell you, though, that there are some principles that are certainly cross-generational, right? And so when I look back on my life, while I never had an aspiration to be an elected official, I certainly see some parallel paths, if you will, that were constant themes and threads in my life that eventually intersected. And those two threads were a thread of leadership that was consistent in my life, whether it was in elementary school, middle school, or high school, and a thread of communications. And then eventually the two intersected when I ran for my first office of city council. And that intersection came actually, I believe, not necessarily a pursuit of elected office, but more of a fulfilling of a calling to help humanity in my community.
That's great. Yeah, Aaron, go ahead.
Mine's it's a long roundabout answer, and I'll be quick. But it's a GSB story, and so the joke that people used to tell, or at least when I was there, about the GSB is that it unzips you, it rearranges your insides, and then zips you back up and sends you out into the world. And I was a lost soul leaving the GSB, I think, as a result of all those processes. And so I was a finance guy coming into GSB. I was in sales and trading, and then I worked in private equity during my GSB summer. And the only thing that I knew about myself was that the only thing that I cared about was Black communities and low income communities from my career perspective. And so I knew that, or I kind of learned as a part of this GSB touchy-feely blah, blah, blah process, that this is where I kind of needed to dedicate the rest of my life. I thought I was going to make a bunch of money and then kind of focus on those things, and that really wasn't how it worked out for me. And I'm very happy about that. And so I left GSB had a 9-month walkabout existential crisis where I was doing a fellowship in public policy and doing a bunch of different things and trying to figure life out. And then at the end of 2017, which is the year I graduated, Opportunity Zones passed, which I think we're going to be talking about a little bit later, which combined kind of, capital allocation, which is something that I'm very interested in low-income communities, which is the only thing I'm passionate about, primarily Black communities. And that kind of led me on this path. And then I ended up joining this organization, and now I lead it. So that's kind of what led me to this point. But I think, the thing I've always known since I was 12 was that this is the only thing that I cared about. And I think it took me a while until I was, 28, 29 to figure out that this is what I needed to dedicate my career to.
That's great. Mayor Weston Broom, I would love to hear kind of what your mayoral position holds, what type of power it holds. I think a lot of people are disillusioned of what a mayor actually can and cannot do. So I'd love to hear from you, what is your role in government, and what strings of power can you pull and what can't you pull?
Well, I'll start off by saying I have a unique title that I'm often questioned about, and that is certainly connected to Louisiana, and that is that I am the mayor president, the mayor of the city of Baton Rouge. And as you know, we have parishes here, and the president of the parish or county, if you will. And so I really feel the role of a chief executive officer here in our city and parish. And my residents are stakeholders and shareholders. And so you might see my office, in fact, as the executive suite of government. And what we do, I certainly have the ability to set agendas, to set goals. Certainly we manage the overall operations of the city. I would say that the work that we do also is a lot about community collaboration, right? To improve the status of our community. And now I know you hear a lot about P3, public-private partnerships, right? So that has become a new addition to city parish government, especially in recent years. And so we have a 12-member council, the legislative branch, but we are considered a strong mayor form of government.
Great. And Aaron, I'd love for you to just dive deeper in what Started for America has done in the past and some of the programs that you guys have kind of initiated from start, or at least played with when it comes to the government.
Sure. Look, the organization is set up to help local leaders like the mayor president here mitigate economic insecurity in their communities themselves. And so our goal is to be a resource, particularly now in an administration that is more friendly to cities, sitting as an intermediary between the federal government and cities, trying to provide them tools and resources to help them figure out what they need to figure out, right? We want to help them meet their goals as opposed to, set or prescribe any goals for them. And so I guess a couple things that I'd mentioned. We started out, we transit infrastructure stuff. So we help cities pass local ballot measures. We passed between $40 and $50 billion over the last 3-4 years in ballot measures. But the thing that's kind of near and dear to my heart is basically thinking about how private capital interacts with low-income communities. So, the P3s that the mayor was talking about. We started with opportunity zones and trying to help mayors, one, figure out the legislation and two, attract capital to their communities to do stuff that they wanted to do. The concern and fear was that the capital was going to come in without, kind of public support or collaboration with community organizations and do things that we didn't want to see. I think that that's kind of turned out to be true over time. Again, we could talk about that later. But more recently, I think post-pandemic, we've really been focused on two things. One is pandemic assistance. We built out a model called the Angelino Card here in Los Angeles, where I'm based, that gave about $38 million to communities affected by the coronavirus in Los Angeles, predominantly undocumented communities that didn't have access to federal stimulus. And we partnered with MasterCard and Cisco and a couple of other partners to kind of build out that infrastructure, and then scaled that throughout 8 cities and 2 states across the country. The idea of direct assistance through these cards that will be able to quickly and nimbly get to communities that, are having trouble accessing federal funding or federal support. And then the thing that we're doing most recently as a result of the pandemic is creating tools and playbooks for mayors to, one, recover from a small business perspective from the coronavirus, but also understand most recently what's in this American Rescue Plan, the big package that the Biden administration or Congress passed, a little over a month ago, I guess at this point. So, it's 800 pages of legislation. There's an unprecedented amount of money that's coming into cities. And we want to help mayors understand what's in it, leverage it properly to, best affect the low income communities that we all mutually care about. And then I think one important thing is communicate both internally and externally to stakeholders what they've done with the money. There's a lot of people that, Mayor, I was talking to Mayor Cantrell in New Orleans about this, that there's a lot of people that want to see cities fail at leveraging this capital because they don't believe that they should have had it in the first place, right? And so one of the things that we're trying to help mayors do is communicate, like, this is what came, this is what we did with it, and this is why it's particularly impactful and why we needed it, especially in a moment like this where, I'm curious as to your thoughts here, Mayor, but, a lot of the mayors that we're talking to and the programs that we're running, this is unprecedented money that's coming to them, and they want to make sure that they spend it right, and so this is new for them, and I think that that's the goal for us to try to help. So we have a set of tools and resources for that we've found we've gotten some good feedback on.
Yeah, we need to have a conversation, Aaron, after this is over with. But I will tell you that I've had several different scenarios suggested in terms of moving forward with those unprecedented dollars. One being, have someone organize and lay out a plan. Another one being gather a community a committee of community and other stakeholders to lay out priorities. And the last one, of course, not necessarily in this order, is that we already have established priorities as part of our mission here in city parish government that certainly need funding. And so we might start there, but I would love to have a conversation with you after about what you all are doing at Accelerate for America.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I want to dive into a little bit of social justice and how it also meets the economics and how those interplay. I know that a lot of the problems surrounding social justice revolve around economic inequality, specifically an uneven playing field that has left Black people historically out of a lot of opportunities in the general markets. One of some of the roles that the Black community has taken is really diving into the underground markets. And I'm curious to hear from both of you, what are some private-public partnerships, or maybe even we were talking about the money that had been given to these cities, how can that be necessarily pushed into communities that may not have the right opportunities or may not have the ability to get a job that will feed their family and actually allow them to live?
Yeah, I'll dive in on that. That's a great question. Let me start by saying when I ran for mayor in 2016, my first term, there was a hue and cry from the communities of color surrounding the lack of access to participate in the economy here in our city, especially specifically with what I have control over, city parish contracts, right? We have millions of dollars that flow through city parish government on a regular basis. But the African American community was saying, we never have access. No one, there are not opportunities. And so that was a hue and cry when I ran for office the first time. And when I became mayor, I made it a top priority, number one, to develop an equity in business model for city parish government. And what I do know is that you have to be very intentional if you're going to promote economic equity. It won't just happen by thinking your staff is just going to do it, your department heads. You have to be very intentional. So we started out doing equity in business seminars. So communities of color could understand how you go about doing business with the city, We would empower them not only with information, but with technical assistance so we could increase the number. Then we had a very breakthrough moment that happened. And I heard Aaron talk about infrastructure. Infrastructure is the word of the hour right now. Well, several years ago, at my first term, I knew that transportation and roads was a big issue here in my city and parish. And so I passed one of the largest, not one, the largest infrastructure project in the history of Baton Rouge. We call it Move EBR. Now, this is a $1 billion initiative. It would be shameful for me as a mayor if I didn't see this as an opportunity to create access and opportunities to empower communities of color, disinvested communities, etc. And so I had, and I'm going to be very transparent, I had people come to me who wanted to be program managers for this project. And I'd let them, court me and tell me their spiel. And then I said to them, tell me, what does equity and inclusion look like to you? Stunned them. They didn't expect that to come from me. And so they had their initial remarks, but guess what? Later on, they followed up with a conversation. They said, let's have a follow-up meeting. And when they came back with the follow-up meeting, they had wrapped their minds around equity and inclusion and showed me how they were going to include people of color, businesses of color in this $1 billion initiative. But even as we continue to roll it out, I have to be very intentional about staying engaged in the process. We have someone who is doing small business and minority business outreach. But when you have a project like this, you have to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table. And I'm of the opinion, and I know I'm probably going a little bit too long, but I'm of the opinion, I don't adhere to this adage that has been promulgated over the years. Well, we could never find anyone. No, I don't believe that. I believe there are people out there and you got to try harder to find them if you haven't found them. But people are there who can participate and should participate in these opportunities. So that's just one example of what we've done here as mayor. Of course, I've had to do executive orders. So my department heads understand the value of economic equity in the city of Baton Rouge. So I hope I've shared a little bit.
I want to add on to that, to what the mayor was saying, because I think it's a great point to Devon, the first question you asked, which is what can the mayor do and not do, right? And so I think a thing to note about mayors is that they don't have the power of the purse, right? I think it's a really interesting and challenging job because they get money that's appropriated from the federal government and they get money that comes from local revenues. Obviously, the last year, local revenues have been really hurt by the pandemic. And so, the mayor and her colleagues sit in these seats where they are the first line of defense or the first line of blame for all these kind of things. But, they, especially for the last 4 years, I'm sure during your first term or terms, mayor, there wasn't much coming from the federal government to help in that regard. Right. And so I think the thing that mayors can do and that we've seen people do a really good way is, one, convene the right people, set the priorities, let them know that this is not optional as the mayor has done, and then allocate funds that come to them in ways that prioritize equity. And so an example that I've seen that I think is really good is in Birmingham, Mayor Woodfin, whom I'm sure you know well, has done a lot of really innovative things around the pandemic. And so, the CARES Act passed a while ago. The ARP is more recent, giving funds directly to cities to help with coronavirus recovery. And so one thing that they did as a part of their Birmingham Strong initiative was pay people in Birmingham, 75% Black. It's a Black ass city. So they're paying Black people to go do contact tracing and volunteer testing sites and now vaccine sites and stuff like that, right? And so the question is how do you get people out of the underground economy and into the mainstream economy? Is this is modeled on the Works Progress administration of the New Deal in the 30s. Is let's pay people to do stuff, and you need money to do that. And finally, the federal government is appropriating money in a way that allows cities to be able to do that. In the meantime, all you can do is say, look, here are my biggest business leaders in town, as the mayor has just said, like, here's what you got to do, right? And there are a number of reasons and mechanisms by which you can do that. There's a thing called the Cincinnati Minority Business Accelerator in Cincy that exists as an intermediary between the public and private sectors that supports the mayor in this endeavor to help grow businesses, to help understand, contracting, sourcing, procurement opportunities for Black and brown and small businesses in those cities. And I think that those intermediaries need to exist because, as the mayor said, it's not going to happen on accident, right? Like these disparities are created on purpose over hundreds and hundreds of years, and they don't get solved by accident. And so having a conscious and intentional strategy and making sure that the person at the top, aka the mayor, who's to my right on my screen, is leading and setting that as a not optional thing, I think is really, really important.
It's incredible. I also want to touch, and this probably relates to the last question, on recidivism. Recidivism is at 44% average for the U.S., and it is a really problem getting people who have come from the justice system back into the working economy. And as we know, Black and brown people are affected the most by the justice system as is. I'm curious, what are some solutions to get people back into the working economy who come from the justice system and really increase economic mobility for them and their families?
Well, I believe one way to combat recidivism is to create and showcase all of the opportunities that we have to offer. I also believe that initiatives like Ban the Box certainly help in getting people back into the economy and combating recidivism. There are many opportunities in the industrial sector. We have tech giants like IBM in agriculture and academia, and we are always looking to invite more opportunities within our capital region. And these people have to have a high sensitivity to that as well. And I think leaders, that's the leadership thread, should have a high sensitivity, but we have to create opportunities and make them known. Here in our city parish government, we have a program that's called Employ BR, where we invite folks in who are untraditional in non-traditional, I should say, in the workspace or workforce, and we train them with opportunities. And then we have partners in the workforce who immediately put them to work. And so I believe those are some initiatives that we've taken here locally.
Yeah, I'd say, look, that's the answer, right? Give them jobs, man. And I think that there have been all these structures in place for generations that preclude you from being able to give them a job, even if you want to, right? And I think that one of the things that is worthwhile to be optimistic about, after all, basically, pre and post George Floyd world, all this, all these bullshit proclamations you see companies make, and we're dedicating this capital, whatever. I think that one of the things that, makes me encouraged is that a lot of people, organizers, activists, people really doing the work on the ground, have held people's feet to the fire to do stuff like this, right? Like the answer is oh, we don't need your stupid knee on the Congress floor, you wearing a kufi on whatever the thing is, right? Like we don't need the stupid gesture, but hire Black people, pay them more money, right? Like foster equity in your organization and in your society. And I think local leaders are doing, as the mayor just mentioned, but I think that mayors, and there's also just a really exciting cohort of young Black leaders across the country, the one you're seeing on your screen, like Mayor Woodfin, like Mayor Lucas in KC, who we missed today, who are better equipped to hold people to the fire on that, right? Like the old white mayor who, that's number 17 on his 100 thing priority list, great. But I think that there's people now that are holding people's feet to the fire about this. So we have actionable things. Ban the box is one, but also just holding people accountable a year after George Floyd. I mean, we don't have a ton of reason to be optimistic this week, but I think in the macro scale that we do is, staying on them and saying, you made this commitment a year ago. That doesn't mean that you've got your tweet and your PR hit or whatever. I think that local leaders and mayors have the mayor of LA, who's the chair of our organization, I think has done this a lot with a lot of the business leaders, entertainment leaders in LA. They commit stuff, not just dollar amounts to random charities, but actions on behalf of their companies. I think that's really important.
Thank you for that. I want to now dive into opportunity zones. So if you aren't aware, opportunity zones was established in 2017 by the Congress, basically to push private dollars into lower income neighborhoods. I'm curious for both Aaron and Mayor Weston Broom, how has opportunity zones affected you? Obviously, Aaron, you've really dealt with the program, but really for the second lead with Mayor Weston Broom, how has the program affected Baton Rouge in particular, and what dividends have come from it, or what hasn't come from it, is what I'd love to hear from both of y'all.
Well, I'll start off my remark. And Aaron, sometimes I feel like I should defer to you to start.
Please, no.
I'll start off by saying this. From my perspective, and I always like to use data to back up everything, right? But let's just say from my perspective, from where I sit, I think there's certainly room for improvement around opportunity zones. So I'll start that. That'll be my initial statement. But I think that certainly the focus of the legislation was right on track, was needed. Investment in economically distressed communities all over the country. And so, but it takes projects, it takes investors. And that is what makes the opportunity zones work. So, for example, if there's a vacant office business property in a zone downtown that was just purchased for reuse and repurposing, and we have a number of investors looking at a number of projects around the city, that's good. But are you going to also look over in those disinvested communities where the opportunity zones really, really could make an impact? So I've had conversations with people who have been interested in the opportunity zones, and it's good to have investors buzzing around. But I think that we need a deeper dive and a stronger push when it comes to promoting investments in all parts of our city.
So the mayor has been very diplomatic, as she's wont to do, as somebody in that seat is supposed to be. I'm not a mayor, so I can be honest. So I'll give some context and say that I spent the first couple years after my post GSB career running around the country trying to help people get opportunities on capital into projects that actually help low-income communities, Black communities, and I think it was largely a failure. And I think that the thing that I've learned, there's data to back that up. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But I think the thing that I've learned is that so the idea is that you're supposed to incentivize people, incentivize investors. You get a huge tax break if you invest in a poor community, right? There are a bunch of them designated. And so the idea, and this is what enticed me post-business school, was like, man, this is a pretty insane tax break. And so people are going to want to bring capital into places they haven't before. It turns out when there are opportunity zones, when you get the same tax break for investing in downtown Los Angeles and Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan as you do for investing in Birmingham, Alabama, Baton Rouge, Jackson, Mississippi, Erie, Pennsylvania, Waterloo, Iowa, whatever, then all the people are going to invest in Hell's Kitchen in downtown LA, and nobody's going to invest in, I can't speak to what the mayor has seen in Baton Rouge, but I would imagine it's a lot harder to get a deal done there than here. And so I think that there are a number of reforms. Some zones shouldn't have been zones. We don't have any kind of accountability or data transparency as to where the capital goes and what it does. And I think that there's room for improvement. I'm skeptical, and I was a big I was waving the flag 3-4 years ago, whatever. And so, it's hard to get people to invest in things that invest in low-income communities because, by definition, those things don't make a lot of money, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I think a lot of the capital that, one of the benefits of opportunity zones was advertised to be that great investors, capital allocators that have never thought about poverty, low-income communities are now going to go in, right? So Goldman Sachs, because of the tax break that they get, is going to look at Baton Rouge, right? That was the promise of it. And the thing is that it turns out we learned, or at least I learned, was like Goldman Sachs doesn't, no offense to Goldman Sachs, they have a great urban investment group that actually does good things, but, insert whatever institutional fund here. They're not trying to invest in things that support low-income communities. Often they're investing in things that will be the frontier of, or the tip of the spear of gentrification displacement of these people. And of these communities themselves, because, you're investing in things that you want to grow, and population growth, particularly in low income communities, often, especially ones, on the coast and in places like Chicago, are ones where, upper income people like yuppies like us are going to be moving into, right? And that's not particularly helpful for those communities, because they're, the most vulnerable are going to be the first ones to be pushed out. And so some data came out about opportunity zones over the last couple of days that, this is kind of the first empirical data on opportunity zones. They categorized about $19 billion invested in these places. And of that $19 billion, all of it, every single dollar went into the top 16% of opportunity zones. So 84% of opportunity zones got not a dollar invested whatsoever. And you won't be surprised to hear that those are the blackest opportunity zones, are the ones that didn't get any money, right? And so it's this kind of this two-sided coin of the places that so desperately actually need the capital, right? I've talked to a lot of mayors from southern cities and post-industrial cities in the Midwest that want any kind of capital whatsoever, because those mean jobs in a world where we've lost however many, tens of thousands of jobs over the last generation. It's not going into those places and giving those jobs. And the places where it does go, it ends up hurting the black people that are there in the first place. And we can't even have an official means of understanding what the program did, because there's no data collection, there's no transparency. And so I am a little bit less diplomatic about opportunity zones than the mayor president is, but I think I would be surprised if we didn't come to the same conclusions.
I'm curious on top of that, do you think opportunity zones would be more effective if they were more intentional about the communities that they wanted to put money into, or is still the gentrification aspect a no-go in terms of improvement for the communities?
I think it's hard, man. I mean, I think so. Trump gets a lot of credit for opportunity zones. Obama was really into it. It was a legitimate bipartisan thing. It was Cory Booker, Tim Scott. It is not a racist Trump administration thing, right? It was conceived with good intent. But it's really hard to mandate that people do good things in low-income communities from the federal level, right? And I think it highlights the role of the local leader, one, right? It highlights the role of people like the mayor president, but it's also it highlights the desperation of the challenge of I'm not a big believer. I'm going to get a lot of shit for this. I'm probably from a lot of business school people watching. I'm not a big believer in black capitalism, right? I don't think small business development is going to be our liberation. I think it's a lot of things like reparation. I think it's actual, the idea that we are going to entrepreneur our way out of 400 years of oppression it doesn't really jive with me. And so the idea that it's great that we're incentivizing private investors to try to do good things, and we've failed at it. I think that you could be, to answer your direct question, Devon, you could be more specific about what you are and are not allowed to do if it were only affordable housing, if it were only, you can't mandate black entrepreneurs because of the Constitution, and probably rightfully so. But if you were able to make it more specific about things that you could do, I think it would help. But I think really what you need is a lot of stuff that helps communities that, there's a child tax credit that supports families better, right? Those communities would be better off if they had more money, if they had, if they had support that has been owed to them for a long, long, long time. And so I think that the idea that this type of thing was going to solve the problem in the first place, I think is in error.
I'm definitely interested in the whole reparations and.
Sorry, that's a whole.
That's a whole other conversation. If we have time, we can dig deep into that as well. I don't know if both of you are prepared to have that conversation, but definitely interesting, as well as baby bonds, which Cory Booker is a big proponent of. But I want to touch, we already talked about gentrification a little bit, but I'd love for both of you to kind of tell, how does gentrification affect the Black community? What is the downsides? Are there upsides? Just the general opinion of what is happening to Baton Rouge and these other communities that have a lot of yuppies come in, and there's this displacement of Black people. Is that definitely negative in some ways, especially culturally, but what is the larger impact, and how do you mitigate it? What is the plan or approach to gentrification, if there is any?
That's a pretty voluminous question there. Got to tackle it. Let me just say that, over my many years here on this earth, I have certainly seen gentrification negatively impact historically Black neighborhoods across the country. I will tell you, I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, and our our home place, if you will, of the home that I grew up in on the southeast side of Chicago, which was, a predominantly African American working class neighborhood. Many of the residents there are now being shifted out of their homes, and people who don't look like you and I are now in those places, and the homes are selling for humongous amounts of money. And we've seen that all over the country. Here in Baton Rouge, we're working to, I would say, I'm not going to say prevent gentrification, but I will say two things. Okay, we're working to prevent gentrification from affecting our residents by working alongside with investors and developers to protect the integrity of our neighborhoods. But also, I believe, I envision neighborhoods where if you want to come in and, revitalize a neighborhood that's attracting folks from the white community, well, don't, evict the other folks out of the neighborhood, make them sustain them there, provide ways that they can sustain their home, their longevity in that neighborhood, because actually they are the fabric which holds the neighborhood together. And so for investors who have that kind of vision and insight, I believe that reinvestment can have more of a positive impact. And so our goal is to bring investments from individuals and businesses who are committed to protecting these areas and the residents and the culture that is a part of the fabric of those neighborhoods.
So I'm just going to add on to what the mayor was saying by saying that the gentrification itself isn't the problem, right? It's the displacement, right? Gentrification happens in a lot of communities that have experienced violence over the last 30 years, significant poverty. So we like lower violence. We like better schools, right? Like we want it often, again, a controversial thing, often an increase in more thoughtful police presence in these communities to prevent, we want those things. Black communities want those things. Poor communities want those things. We just want them without the idea of getting kicked out of our own communities, right? And the problem with the, uplift that comes from gentrification is that we don't get to participate, right? And so one of the solutions to it, as the mayor alluded to, is things that include the communities themselves in the uplift, right? Or at least don't hurt them, right? That's the bare minimum. It's like when you come in and do something, like don't kick me out, right? But I think that when you think about making sure that people can actually participate, there's a lot. There are a number of kind of burgeoning ideas happening nationally. Nothing really that's like scaled to that idea, but there are things that there are pilots in Kansas City at the Kauffman Foundation, Devon, I know you're familiar with, places like Austin, Texas, and West Virginia that are, giving equity to people in new developments, right? Giving equity to local communities. And so the idea is like, great, we got uplift. You want part of it, right? You should share in this wealth building. And that's a really important portion of it. So one, you can stay around, but two, you can access that prosperity yourself. There's a dude, I think, who's still in attendance, our brother Mace, who's building a business that prioritizes the community ownership of development, the community ownership of business is the priority of the local business owners, and bringing people back into the communities or as he says, gentrifying with a J, which is kind of, bringing ownership back to the Black communities in these neighborhoods. I guess the last thing I'll say is that the investment necessary is the one, it's the investment necessary is also from the federal government, the uplift of people, right? And making sure that that people are able to, if access those jobs or whatever they might be in job training, workforce development, blah, blah, blah. If a developer, if a whatever business is coming to your community, they should have some sort of mandate or some sort of requirement to hire the people in that community, right? Because that's the thing. We want business. We want economic development. Economic development only means jobs. And it should be the people in that neighborhood getting those jobs. And they should have the, structures and systems available to train them for those jobs.
Definitely agree with that. I think the economic mobility piece is key to the display or trying to stop the displacement from these communities. Last question before we go into Q&A. I'd love just to hear from both of you, what are the biggest opportunities on the horizon to increase economic mobility within the Black community, whether from a public policy side or a private side? Where should we kind of dig deep into investing our time and our power, our respective time and powers?
Well, I'll say, as a mayor, I am looking right now through the lens of policies, right? What policies do we have here in our city parish government that are an obstruction to, as I said, without sounding redundant, equity and inclusion? I think it's very important for me to use the power that I have as mayor, not first of all to use the bully pulpit, also to use my influence with the business community here as we talk about public-private partnerships, and then simultaneously prepare African Americans who have not normally had access to be equipped when the opportunities present themselves. And it all goes back to what I consider a framework of intentionality and being strategic and thinking strategically, more importantly, as we look to the future of our communities. I heard Aaron say something, I think, earlier. Right now, there's money flowing down from the federal government. It's unprecedented. So how do I include and make sure that folks get included more than just stimulus checks, right? So that they can be part of the wealth building, that is going to take place because of these infusion of dollars. And so that is how we are thinking futuristically about the economics of our community here in Baton Rouge.
I think the thing that I would encourage people to double click on, and I think serves as a piece of optimism, is that we have, because of activists, organizers on the ground, people fighting the fight, more of an opportunity than ever to call people's attention to this shit, right? And I think that the next step is understanding what we're holding people accountable to. And so I think one of the challenges that we've seen over the past decade, and I think the Trump era catalyzed this as well, or continues, it exacerbates it, is that all politics is national, right? Like, people vote based on, they pick their party based on the president now, whereas it used to be much more localized. And I think so much of the things that affect the things that we care about, racial equity, et cetera, are very local, right? And I think that, when you think about criminal justice organizations or police accountability policies, those are all at the local level. Dallas has a different, police department or policy than LA does, than Sacramento does, that whatever. And so showing up locally and telling the mayor or the legislature, often the state legislature, what they need to do about these things, as opposed to just taking a knee on the Congress floor or whatever, right? They know, like, legislators and leaders know right now that they can take a knee, and activists will not the people on the ground, but the American public will forget about this in 3 months. And so they need to know that their local leaders like the mayor here need to know that they're backed up by the people when they want to do stuff like challenge police power, right? And so I think us understanding, in cities, I have no idea how it is in Baton Rouge, but most of the big cities and states around the country, police unions are extremely, extremely powerful. And they, if somebody's going to fight them, they need to know that they're because they're going to get, they're going to have a battle on their hands. They need to know that the people are behind them. And so knowing what the police legislation is on, right? In California, for example, I know a lot of GSP people are here. In California, we're the most progressive state in the country, blah, 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 blah. Every bill that actually went to change things post George Floyd failed in the legislature because they know that the police union is there every single day in the legislature, and they know that the people marching are back in their crib or whatever it is they're doing, right? And so engaging with what's happening from a policy and legislative level, and staying at the mayor's, in front of the mayor's office or in front of City Hall or whatever, no offense, mayor, and letting them know that like, yo, you got to do this, or at the legislator's office or whatever, like you have to do this because we care, and we will vote you out otherwise. They know that the police union and the whatever are going to do that, and they need to know that the people on the other side are there too.
Those are great insights. We're going to move on to Q&A, and I'm just going to read off of screen. Our first question is from Melanie, who's an MBA 1 at GSB. She actually spent some time in Baton Rouge these past year. She's originally from the UK, but one thing that struck her was how racially divided the city was in terms of income. The areas where people live, proximity of these areas to hospitals, and much more. If there was one thing you or I or individuals in my family could realistically do to narrow this divide, what would you advise them to do, Mayor Weston?
Well, let me say that as the mayor, I'm very keenly aware of the racial divide that exists in our community, and I've been working to close that gap, since I have been mayor. In fact, just as a sidebar, we have part of our community, a white suburban part that is trying to break away from the city, which is over 50%, close to 55% African American. So I understand the racial issues here, and I would say that we've been taking some specific steps. So it's really hard for me to say what is one step or two steps that we would take. For example, in the past year, of course, COVID-19 has illuminated the racial disparities of equity of healthcare disparities that exist. And so we've been working to make sure that we now have another emergency room opened in the mid-city area. I don't like to name drop, but there's a young man from Baton Rouge who we ended up having what I would call a divine appointment. Ryan Williams of Cadre. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ryan or not. And Ryan helped me put together a big deal, if you would, right here in North Baton Rouge, where we had a vacant building, former medical complex for 15 years. And now we have a behavioral health center there, primary care clinic, and other entities that are coming. And so I recognize it exists. That's why I've been focusing on what we call North Baton Rouge and other communities of disinvestment. And sometimes I tell you what we need. We need other people who don't look like me to affirm that the work that we're doing in these communities of disinvestment is the right thing to do. Because I'm of the belief that you cannot have part of your community at an A grade and the other part of your community at a D grade and think, oh, we've got the best city in the world. You've got to get that D grade up. And so that's where you put your emphasis. And so it's for me as a leader, when I have other people who affirm, yes, the mayor is going in the right direction in terms of lifting up disinvested communities, bringing accountability to the police department, Aaron. I could write a whole book about my experience with the police union. Just Google it and you'll find out. So I mean, we need partners, when we're trying to do the work. And I think Aaron alluded to that. You're not going to agree with the mayor on everything, but those things that you do see that the mayor is moving in the right direction for this city and this community, stand with me, regardless of the color of your skin.
One thing on the mayor said, so Ryan Williams was my first roommate in New York City. And a really good old friend of mine who's a year above me in college, and his nickname in college was Young Money, just so you know, if you can embarrass him with that later. I would say two things to add to the mayor's point. I think it's interesting. Like, what is the thing that you can do to help this? So one thing is vote for the right people. Vote for people who care about this stuff. Frankly, I know that's a weird thing to say, but like, vote for people who care about this stuff and get people that you know in your family to vote for people who care about this stuff. And I think for a lot of people, and maybe not people on this thing, but a lot of GSP people, that's challenging who come from families and places that don't, that don't care about this stuff or don't. So that's service in and of itself. But two, I would say two things. And I think this is, the person who sent this question might be in California, but it's allow housing to be built in your neighborhood and send your kids to public schools. I think that's what you can do, right? Is that like send your kids to the schools, and as the mayor said, that there's a material proportion of her city that's trying to secede, basically, right? And that's how that economic inequality perpetuates, right? Is that people won't allow economic equality in their city. And I think there's a particular brand of California or coastal liberalism that says, Black Lives Matter, nobody's illegal, but not in my backyard and not in my school. And I think that you can start putting your money where your mouth is a little bit more if you start saying, look, I live, I imagine this person on this thing is a prosperous, successful person. I live in this place and I'm going to allow, my house value to be threatened by people building apartments or low income housing, or in LA, a place like homeless housing or whatever in my community, in my neighborhood, and I'm not going to fight it. I think that is in sending your kids to public schools with kids that like could benefit from being around prosperous families. Those are some of the biggest things that you individually can do to affect economic inequality.
Another question for Mayor Winbroom again, and feel free to chime in as well, Aaron. Mayor, if you go from mayor president to president of the United States, what action do you make?
God willing.
And if any at all.
What action?
Yeah, what action? Or what is the first thing you'd like to get done? Say if you were in Joe Biden's seat at the moment.
Well, I'll be very transparent with you. I have never thought about that, and that's a question that you got to give some thought to. It just doesn't come off the top of my head. But I would say that what I see now, and what I've seen in the Obama administration and the Biden administration are initiatives that I think are more empathetic towards humanity overall. And while I know government doesn't have the answers to everything, I certainly think that an empathetic leader demonstrating empathy is important in this whole process. It might not seem like part of the job description for a president, but I think being highly sensitive to the racial divide that exists in our community, that's a biggie for me. Because I came out of I was growing up, let me just say that. I was growing up during the civil rights movement. As a child, I had an opportunity to see Martin Luther King. I often tell the story. Emmett Till's mother taught at my elementary school in Chicago. Wow. So, that's part of the fabric of seeing that then, and now seeing a repeat now is, really impacts me and my husband. We talk about it all the time. And so what can you do? I know you can't legislate the hearts of individuals, but I do know you can put policies in place to help mitigate some of this oppression that's trying to, reemerge, such as voter suppression and all of these things. And so I think right now where we are in America, just, voter suppression is a biggie. And so if I were president at this moment, it would be one of my top initiatives addressing that.
I love to answer, even though I'm not qualified to at all. Stop. But I want to answer anyway. So one, the mayor's answer, I think is the right answer. Like now in our, constitutional republic, whatever is, voting rights. HR 1 needs a lot of fixes, and it needs also eventually to pass. But if I were president, it would be if I were president and not dictator, it would be like a long-term job guarantee, like a job guarantee pilot. Cory Booker is, has one of those, or has a bill for that, because I think, one, as we talked about, the things that mitigate recidivism and, help communities access prosperity, it's jobs, and it's good jobs. And that's something that we have in our history as a country. I think that we need to get back to. I'm not a UBI guy. I'm more of a job guarantee person. And then if I were a dictator, it'd be reparations. That's not possible in our current, in our current dynamic. There's a lot of people doing a lot of great work trying to make it more possible, but we're a long way away from it. But if I were a dictator, it'd be reparations.
And just for the record, so no one gets nervous, I have no aspirations to be president of the
She's on record.
Awesome. One more question. This is from Landon. Also another question for Mayor. But Aaron, feel free to chime in again. Landon says, you mentioned how you'd like to assist minorities in these low-income communities, equip them with the tools necessary to be ready when these employment opportunities arise as new developers or investors enter their communities. Knowing that these communities often do not or have often also have a low tolerance for patience and prepare for something that may not be in the foreseeable future, how do you hone in on getting their buy-in while also simultaneously pushing investors to speed up things on their end, as well as they choose where they would like to invest?
Mm-hmm. Well, I do what I describe sometimes as a deep dive and indeed work simultaneously, because I will tell you that there are people in the African American community, because it's been such a void of inclusivity that, it's like, when are you going to make it happen? And sometimes I have to share with people, you have no idea. And this goes back to one of the original questions about what I can do and what I can't do. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, bureaucracy is, it's just unbelievable. If I were in private sector, it'd be a whole different story. But I have worked sometimes within certain frameworks. So as I talk to the developers, as I work on projects, I keep the lines of communication open with those individuals who aspire to do work. I not only keep the lines of communication open, but as I said, I continue to, equip them not only with information, but, with assistance. I let them know if I see something that I believe they should be pursuing to enter into city parish opportunities. And so it's a big scheme of trying to manage both. Unfortunately, I often find that folks these days, especially my younger brothers and sisters, have been waiting so long to see, change, a transformative change take place, that, patience is not the word of the hour. So I have to navigate it. But I will tell you, if you talk with some of the whether it's the generation X, Y, Z, millennials, whoever, they will tell you that they have had more access to the mayor's office than they've had in history. So, and what do I mean by that? I mean that I'm literally, they come and meet with me. They come and talk with me. I think everybody in Baton Rouge has my cell phone number. So I am an accessible mayor. And I believe sometimes that's what people want to know, that that you're listening, you're working,